they said the Americans were gone. The war was over. Operation Barkhane shuttered. US boots off Malian soil. But war leaves footprints. And Mali just found one still fresh. 2 weeks ago. In the dead heat of Anif, Malian soldiers uncovered what should not exist: satellite maps marked in English, encrypted phones, field notebooks, and one plastic card, faded but legible. Stephen Russell. Private military contractor. Unity Resources Group. He was not supposed to be here. No American was. It was supposed to be over. But a mission that ends does not leave behind drone logs dated just last month. Or flight paths near rebel lines. These were not leftovers. These were fingerprints. Active. Operating. One recruit whispered, "I thought they left." His commander replied, "They never leave." Not really. And now, Mali is learning what every occupied land learns too late: when foreign boots vanish, their shadows stay behind. If you think this ends here, you're wrong. Like, comment, and stay with us, because the story is just taking off. In August 2023, the US declared the end of its decade-long presence in Mali. Troops boarded helicopters. Officials praised a stable transition. The world moved on. But Mali did not forget. And then came Anif. The day after reclaiming the base, Malian officials sealed it. No cameras. No celebration. Only silence, and a quiet call to the AES Alliance. Soon after, encrypted documents surfaced. Satellite pings linked to Unity Resources Group. Letters signed by Team Lead, Kidal. Dates that didn't match the official timeline. So who's really fighting in Mali? The press stayed quiet. But inside the Sahel, soldiers began to ask, if they left, why do we still find their names buried in the sand? But behind that mission was a secret no one expected. They thought it was just one American. One ID. One anomaly. But Mali had learned to read between the lines. And when they did, the silence broke, not into noise, but into names. Stephen Russell was not alone. His notebook listed call signs. Echo, 6. Bluehawk. Marble, 2. Some pages had initials, SR. CD, RK, scattered across locations like Menaka, Tessalit, Kidal. These were not names of men lost in time. These were operators. Some of them still breathing. Some, perhaps, still watching. And that is when Mali remembered something older than Anif. In 2022, at Anif's base, similar whispers had emerged. A crashed drone. An intercepted signal. But back then, no one wanted to believe the Americans had stayed behind. It had been easier to blame chaos. Rebels. Shadows. But shadows leave trails. Especially the kind that arrive with funding. Because buried under the dry soil of Anif were receipts. Not the kind you print in stores, but the kind that move millions through aid packages. Paper trails connecting non-governmental organizations, NGOs, directly to arms deliveries. Signatures not in Malian cursive, but in French. And suddenly, the ghosts had accents. The defense minister of Mali, Sadio Kamara, called an emergency press briefing. He held up a drone photo captured by the Malian military. It showed 3 men unloading crates near Kidal. The coordinates were French-controlled territory, at least, they were until AES pushed France out. One crate bore the logo of a French humanitarian group. The others held rifles. The room fell silent. Then Kamara spoke. If they call this peacekeeping, then they should teach their drones not to fly with lies. Hours later, Prime Minister Choguel Mega appeared on national television. Calm, stern, he said. France trained them. Armed them. Then told us they were here to save us. That is not help. That is sabotage. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear. But rage held too long. For decades, Malians had been told that help came with conditions. That security came with surrender. That sovereignty was negotiable. But something had changed. And its name was AES. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali had signed more than a treaty. They had signed a promise: no more secrets, no more shadows. Traore himself sent a message to Bamako. Not through diplomats, but through pilots. Military aircraft from Burkina Faso landed in Gao within 48 hours. No fanfare. No press. Just crates marked, "For our brothers." Inside, communication jammers. Terrain drones, field kits. It was not charity. It was alliance. And for the first time in decades, Mali felt what the West had only promised: it felt backed. That week, citizens took to the streets of Bamako. Not in protest, but in unity. Some held photos of their sons who had died fighting rebels. Others held handmade signs. "Stop financing terror in our name. France, take your NGOs with you." Traore, Camara, Mega, one voice. The Western press barely mentioned it. But across the Sahel, people were watching. From Ouagadougou to Niamey, talk shows began asking, if they could do this to Mali, where else are they doing it? And suddenly, the conversation shifted. No longer about one ID card, but about a pattern. About a doctrine. About an entire system of control wrapped in foreign flags and humanitarian smiles. AES ministers convened in Tilaberi for a closed-door summit. Journalists were not allowed in. But a statement emerged. "We will expose the map they have drawn for us, and we will burn it." The twist was no longer subtle. It was drawn in bold. France, Mali declared, was financing terror. Providing weapons. Using NGOs as shell operations. Violating airspace over 50 times. And Mali had proof. Intercepted audio. Video from recovered drones. Coordinates of rebel movements immediately following French flyovers. And NGO bank records showing unsourced wire transfers from embassies abroad. Paris denied everything. Called it a tragic misunderstanding. Accused Mali of fabricating narratives. But the West no longer controlled the narrative. And that was what scared them most. If this made you feel something, drop a comment. She's not the only one rising. They were not afraid of the rifles. They were afraid of the records. Because when Mali accused France of financing terror, it didn't whisper. It declared it, to the African Union, to the press, and most critically, to the International Criminal Court. The response? Nothing. There were no emergency sessions in Brussels. No indictments issued from The Hague. No peacekeeping troops deployed. Only silence. Cold, procedural silence. But this time, Mali had learned to break silence with thunder. Within days. Justice. Weeks passed. Then months. No hearings were scheduled. No investigators dispatched. No prosecutor made a statement. And Mali understood something deeper than betrayal. Justice, too, had been colonized. The International Criminal Court, founded on the ashes of Nuremberg, preaching universal law, had become a blade pointed in only one direction. South. 65% of its cases involved African nations. 0 involved NATO officers. 0 indictments for French air commanders who dropped bombs on villages by mistake. 0 charges for American drone operators who missed their target and hit schools. It was never about the crimes. It was always about who held the pen. Who writes history? Who defines justice? And in that courtroom with marble floors and quiet halls, Africa had never been a plaintiff. Only a defendant. So Mali turned to the continent instead. Traore stood before the AES Council in Ouagadougou, not as a soldier, but as a prosecutor. "We have evidence. We have motive. We have names," he said. "But we do not have a court. So let us build one." Heads turned. Some shocked. Some smiling. Burkina Faso proposed what would be called the Sahel Tribunal, a continental court. Built not to replace the ICC, but to challenge its monopoly on narrative. A court where African jurists judged African crimes. And where foreign crimes on African soil could finally be named. Mali pledged funding. Niger pledged security. Guinea offered legal personnel. And the message was clear: if they won't listen to our pain, they will hear our verdict. The first case proposed France's involvement in Mali. But this was not just about France. This was about the illusion of neutrality. The ICC, once seen as a beacon of post-colonial justice, had become a theater. A stage where Africans were judged in English. In French, by prosecutors flown in from London, Paris, and Washington. Where even the translations of African witnesses were filtered through the lenses of foreign editors. The AES leaders agreed, law without sovereignty is submission dressed in robes. So they declared a regional boycott of the ICC. Not in defiance of justice. In defense of it. Mali's announcement was broadcast live across the continent. We will not be tried by those who armed our enemies. We will not be judged by those who trespassed our skies. We will not beg for justice from the very hands that buried it. Western media called it reckless. African citizens called it necessary. In Accra, Lagos, Kinshasa, people began to ask. If the ICC cannot prosecute drone strikes, who will? If the ICC will not name the countries violating African airspace, who will? If the ICC has failed to protect the sovereignty of Africa, why should Africa protect the ICC? And then came the moment that truly shook the system. AES leaked a memo, an internal EU diplomatic cable, admitting concerns that expanded African legal frameworks may undermine Western influence in shaping regional stability. That was the real fear. Not instability. Not war crimes. But losing control of the script. Because for decades, Africa had been treated not as an author, but as a footnote. The ICC was merely a pen that only wrote in one hand. But what if Africa picked up its own pen? What if it rewrote the meaning of accountability? The Sahel Tribunal launched its first preparatory hearings in Bamako. No live stream. No hashtags. Just a group of African lawyers, investigators, and military analysts doing what The Hague refused to. Listening. Documenting. Naming. And from Mali's side, the evidence kept coming. Testimonies from local villagers. Drone fragments traced to NATO suppliers. Video of French choppers in violation of Mali's airspace. Bank records linking NGO accounts to arms deals. AES made the decision to open investigations not only into foreign powers, but also into internal corruption and abuses. Because sovereignty, they said, starts with self-accountability. It was not perfect. But it was honest. And that was more than the ICC had ever offered. Across Africa, university debates erupted. Law students in Dakar asked why their legal systems had been taught to imitate, not innovate. A professor in Lusaka held a public lecture titled, "Who Judges the Judges?" On social media, a new phrase began to trend: justice must speak African. And behind closed doors in Geneva, the silence had turned to concern. Because the world was watching a continent do what it was never supposed to do. Put justice on trial. If you believe this story deserves to be seen, like it. Share it, and make sure others hear it too. The world had expected Mali to collapse under pressure. Instead, it became the spark. In the weeks following the ICC boycott, something unexpected began to happen. Not in palaces or parliaments, but in classrooms. Radio stations, village halls, and WhatsApp groups across Africa. The question spread like wildfire. If sovereignty cannot be granted, must it be seized? AES didn't wait for a reply. The Alliance launched a continent-wide media campaign titled, "Africa Decides." It wasn't slick. It wasn't polished. But it was raw. Authentic. Powerful. Traore appeared not as a general, but as a citizen. Speaking from a simple wooden table in Ouagadougou, he said, "This is not about war. This is about truth. This is not about France. This is about us. And this time, we will not be spoken for." In Niamey, schoolteachers rewrote history lessons to include the Sahel Tribunal's creation. In Bobo Dioulasso, local youth centers held mock trials of fictional Western officials accused of war crimes, and debated real justice systems. None of this was choreographed. But all of it was coordinated. AES understood something powerful. Before borders fall, stories must change. So they invested not only in troops, but in translators. Not only in weapons, but in words. They launched Radio Souverainite, a Pan-African shortwave broadcast that aired in 14 languages: Fula, Bambara, Hausa, Zarma. Each segment ended the same way. You are not alone. You are not voiceless. This is not just their world. This is our land. It struck deeper than sanctions ever could. Meanwhile, in Geneva, Western diplomats grew frustrated. No matter how many warnings were issued, AES was gaining followers. Benin sent observers. Chad began joint patrol exercises with Mali. Even Ghana, long a pro-Western state, requested private talks. And in Paris, an internal intelligence memo leaked. It read: "The situation is escalating into a cultural revolution. The message is no longer anti-France. It is pro-sovereignty. That makes it far more dangerous." Back in Africa, Traore doubled down. He flew to Bamako for a joint press event with Mega and Kamara. 3 flags. 1 podium. And 1 sentence that echoed beyond Sahel. "If sovereignty is rebellion, then we rebel as one." The crowd erupted. Not in chants, but in silence. A deep, unspoken agreement that something sacred had finally been reclaimed. But AES knew emotion was not enough. So they made it law. The Sahel Tribunal drafted a Continental Sovereignty Charter. A document codifying each nation's right to control over its airspace without foreign surveillance. Full transparency on all NGO financial activity. Independent investigation of war crimes on African soil. Total refusal of any military presence not sanctioned by a Continental Council. The charter was sent to the African Union. Some scoffed, but others signed. Togo, Guinea, CAR, Ethiopia. Slowly, the list grew. By month's end, 11 African nations had declared support. The West called it dangerous. Africa called it overdue. And then came the moment that turned resistance into reality. AES launched Operation Dignity, a coordinated rollback of all remaining Western military assets within their borders. No violence. Just doors closed. Outposts shut. Contracts revoked. In Timbuktu, a French logistics center was dismantled. In Tilaberi, an American listening post went dark. In Kaya, Burkinabe engineers raised AES's first military-controlled drone tower. And all of it streamed live on AES's new satellite channel. Koro, meaning elder in Bambara, because wisdom, they said, was not imported. The images traveled faster than diplomats. And this time, Africa did not explain itself. No press conference. No appeasement. Just action. It was the first time many African youth saw their nations act without apology. And that was the most powerful weapon of all. Because for every foreign soldier escorted out, 10 minds were brought back in. Children began asking different questions. Not, where is the UN, but where were we? Not, what did the West do, but what will we do now? It was no longer about reacting. It was about redefining. And in this new battle, of voice, of vision, of value, AES was winning. Not by overpowering, but by outlasting. By refusing to kneel. By daring to name. By planting the seeds of a sovereignty that did not need permission to grow. If you believe Africa deserves to choose its own future, then make this story known. Share it. Comment. Subscribe. Because this isn't just a resistance. It's a resurrection. While the world debated military withdrawals, another army had never left. They did not wear uniforms. They did not carry rifles. But they had badges. Laptops. Logistics trucks. And they spoke in the language of sustainable development. They were the new foot soldiers of influence. NGOs. After the drones, came the data. After the soldiers, and troops. So they landed talking points. They couldn't occupy with weapons. So they occupied with Wi-Fi. the new battlefield wasn't sand. It was signal. Mali's interior minister, in a leaked memo, said it plainly. They've stopped sending soldiers. Now they send stories. And those stories were everywhere. Articles in independent journals suddenly accused AES of authoritarianism. Reports claimed human rights backsliding, with sources tied to the very NGOs under investigation. AES-linked schools were quietly deranked by global education indices. AES health officials found vaccine shipments delayed by weeks with no explanation. Soft war. Silent siege. And all of it wrapped in the warm language of concern. The twist wasn't that the West had returned. It was that it never needed to. Because it had evolved. Colonialism had gone wireless. AES responded swiftly. They launched a regional audit of all NGOs, revoking licenses from any organization without full financial transparency. They expelled several foreign staff members accused of espionage. They suspended partnerships with networks that refused to disclose donors. The backlash was immediate. Western media cried paranoia. Diplomats warned of humanitarian crises. Sanctions were whispered. But inside Africa, something else was whispered louder. Maybe it's not paranoia if they're really watching. And suddenly, the image of Africa changed. No longer begging for aid. But interrogating it. No longer just rejecting occupation. But diagnosing it. No longer afraid to say. We see the mask. We see the hand beneath the glove. AES didn't shut the door to the world. They just asked one thing before you entered. Take off the mask. If you've ever wondered why power hides behind kindness, share this. Comment your thoughts. Because this isn't just about Mali. This is about every place where help came with a leash. They tried to leave quietly. But Mali refused to forget. They tried to return silently. But Africa had learned to listen for footsteps no longer visible. And now, the silence is ours to break. This was never just about drones or mercenaries or NGOs. It was about the war behind the war. The narrative behind the headlines. The hand behind the handshake. And now, the mask is off. Traore once said, "We do not fight the West. We fight the idea that Africa must kneel." From Bamako to Bobo, from Niamey to Nouakchott, that idea is dying. And in its place, something ancient rises. Dignity. Memory. Fire. If you're still watching, then you are part of this. If this flight touched you, don't scroll past. Like. Comment. Subscribe. And more than anything, remember. They had maps. But we have memory. They had mercenaries. But we have meaning. They had strategy. But we have soul. This isn't just a video. It's a vision.